The league office does not convene its officials on short notice, pull decision-makers away from their schedules, and issue formal penalties within hours of a game concluding unless what happened on that field crossed a line that the ordinary mechanisms of the sport cannot handle. Warnings can be issued during games. Ejections happen in real time. The standard disciplinary process, slow and deliberate by design, handles the vast majority of situations that arise across a 162-game season. An emergency meeting means something different. It means the situation that just occurred was serious enough, significant enough, and potentially damaging enough to the integrity of the sport that waiting for the ordinary process to unfold was not acceptable. It means someone in that league office looked at what happened involving Shohei Ohtani and the Colorado Rockies and made a judgment call that this could not wait until Monday morning. That judgment call was made within hours of the final out. By the time the players had showered and dressed and the stadium had begun to empty, the calls had already gone out. The officials were already assembling. The footage was already being reviewed. And somewhere in a conference room that most baseball fans will never see, the people responsible for protecting the integrity of the sport were sitting around a table looking at evidence of something that had happened on a Major League Baseball field involving the most important player in the game today. What they saw in that footage made the decision easy. Heavy penalties. Immediate suspension. 2 Rockies players facing consequences that would follow them for the remainder of the series and beyond. And in a locker room across the stadium, a teammate who had watched everything unfold was saying words that nobody who heard them would forget. If they don't apologize to Shohei, they'll never play again. Because emergency meetings do not emerge from ordinary baseball incidents. They do not emerge from hard slides or inside pitches or bench-clearing arguments that flare up and cool down within the same inning. These things happen constantly across a major league season. They are part of the sport's DNA, part of the competitive friction that has always existed between teams fighting for wins in a league where the margin between success and failure is razor-thin. What happened involving Ohtani was not ordinary baseball friction. It began in the 3rd inning, in a sequence of events that the umpires on the field flagged immediately but did not have sufficient grounds to penalize in real time. The first incident was ambiguous enough to be read as competitive aggression, the kind of edge-of-the-rulebook behavior that experienced players deploy deliberately, knowing that the line between what is permitted and what is not permitted is sometimes blurry enough to exploit in the moment. But the second incident, which occurred in the 5th inning, was not ambiguous. The 2 Rockies players whose names would later appear in the suspension announcement had coordinated something. This is the word that the umpires used in their post-game report, and it is a word with specific weight in the context of a disciplinary proceeding. Coordinated means intentional. Coordinated means planned. Coordinated means that what happened to Ohtani in that inning was not the result of competitive heat or individual impulse but of a decision made before the moment arrived and executed when the opportunity presented itself. What that coordination produced, the specific nature of the foul play that triggered the emergency meeting, was something that targeted Ohtani specifically. Not the Dodgers broadly. Not the game situation generally. Ohtani, by name, by intent, with a deliberateness that the footage made impossible to explain away as coincidence or competitive instinct. When the umpires reviewed that footage in their post-game report, their language was unambiguous. This was directed. This was premeditated. And this required a response that matched the seriousness of what had been done. This detail matters because the questioning of the 2 Rockies players was not a routine post-game interview. It was a formal proceeding, structured, documented, conducted with the awareness that everything said in that room would become part of an official record that the league would use to make its disciplinary determination. The umpire who led the questioning has been in the league long enough to have seen nearly everything the sport can produce in terms of competitive misconduct. He has worked playoff games, World Series games, games where the pressure and the stakes created environments where players pushed rules to their absolute limits. He has issued warnings and ejections and post-game reports across a career that spans decades of professional baseball. He walked into that questioning session with the footage already reviewed and a set of specific questions prepared. He was not looking for a confession. Confessions in formal disciplinary proceedings are rare, and experienced players know enough about the process to understand that their words in that room carry consequences that extend well beyond the immediate situation. What he was looking for was consistency. Whether the accounts the two players offered of what happened aligned with what the footage showed. Whether the explanation they provided for their actions held up against the documentary evidence that the league had already assembled. Whether there was any version of events that could support a reading of what occurred as unintentional or competitive rather than coordinated and targeted. There was not. The first player's account contradicted the footage in two specific places. The second player's account, offered separately, contradicted the first player's account in ways that made the coordination between them visible even in how they tried to explain it away. The umpire closed his notebook, thanked both players for their time, and submitted his report to the league office. The suspension announcement followed within the hour. This is the inevitable response to a disciplinary situation of this magnitude, a carefully worded organizational statement that acknowledges the league's authority to make disciplinary decisions while stopping well short of acknowledging what the two suspended players actually did. The statement expressed respect for the league's process. It noted that the organization takes matters of player conduct seriously. It offered language about competitive intensity and the passion that drives professional athletes to compete at the highest level, language designed to provide context for what happened without directly defending it. What the statement did not contain was an apology. Not to the league. Not to the Dodgers organization. And not to Shohei Ohtani. In the absence of that apology, the statement landed exactly as poorly as the people who drafted it probably feared it would. Because the baseball world had seen the footage by the time the statement was released. The baseball world understood what the emergency meeting had been called to address and what the suspension announcement had confirmed. The organizational language of careful non-accountability felt, in that context, like its own kind of statement, one that said the organization understood what its players had done and had decided that protecting them from full accountability was more important than acknowledging the truth of what had occurred. That decision had consequences. Inside the Dodgers locker room, those consequences were immediate and loud. This is important context. Because Sugano is not a player who generates controversy. He is not someone whose name appears in disciplinary reports or whose comments in press conferences create headlines. He is a professional in the fullest sense of that word, someone who shows up, prepares meticulously, competes with everything he has, and manages his public presence with the kind of restraint that comes from years of competing in environments where discipline and composure are non-negotiable. He had watched what happened to Ohtani in that game from the dugout. He had processed it with the controlled internal management that professional athletes develop across careers of navigating difficult moments. He had said nothing in the immediate aftermath. He had gone through the post-game routine with the same quiet professionalism that defines how he approaches everything. And then the Rockies organization released their statement. The statement that acknowledged the league's process and expressed respect for competitive intensity and said nothing about the player who had been targeted. About what he had been subjected to. About the basic human accountability that the situation required. Something in Sugano shifted. He had been sitting in the locker room when word of the statement reached the players. He read it. He read it again. And then he set down whatever he was holding and spoke in a voice that was quiet enough that the players nearest to him had to lean in to hear and loud enough that the message traveled across the room without him raising it. If they don't apologize to Shohei, they'll never play again. Because Sugano does not make threats. This is not his character. This is not the kind of language that belongs in his vocabulary under ordinary circumstances. The players in that locker room who knew him, who had competed alongside him, who understood how he operates and what his baseline looks like, heard those words and understood immediately that they were not the product of competitive frustration or emotional heat. They were a statement of conviction. Sugano had arrived at a position, through watching what happened on the field, through watching the organizational response that followed, through the specific absence of an apology that the situation demanded, and he was stating that position with the calm certainty of someone who has thought it through and means every word. The "never play again" language requires careful interpretation. Because taken literally, it is not within Sugano's power to end another player's career. He knows this. Everyone in that locker room knows this. The literal interpretation is not the point. The point is consequence. The point is that in professional baseball, as in professional life broadly, how you handle the moments when you have done something wrong matters enormously. It matters for your relationships within the sport. It matters for the respect you receive from competitors and teammates and the organizations that make decisions about your future. It matters for the reputation that follows you through a career and shapes how your name is remembered when the playing days are over. Sugano was saying that the two suspended players had reached a moment where the only path back toward the respect and the standing that a professional baseball career requires runs directly through an apology to Shohei Ohtani. That without that apology, without the basic human acknowledgement that what was done was wrong and that the person it was done to deserved better, the cost to their standing in the sport would be permanent. He was not predicting their future. He was describing what integrity requires. And he was doing it in the only language strong enough to communicate how seriously he meant it. He did not make a statement. He did not address the media in the immediate aftermath of the emergency meeting or the suspension announcement or the Rockies' organizational response that had triggered Sugano's words. He went through his post-game routine with the same focused discipline that he brings to every aspect of his professional life. But the people around him, the teammates who know him, the coaches who work with him daily, the organizational staff who observe him across the full arc of a season, reported something that they noted without being asked. They noted that Ohtani had been aware of everything. Of the emergency meeting. Of the suspension. Of the organizational statement that offered language without accountability. Of Sugano's words in the locker room that had reached him the way things always reach the most important person in a room, indirectly, through the people closest to him, carrying the weight of what had been said intact. He had taken it all in. He had processed it. And he had returned to his preparation with the same quiet commitment to what comes next that defines how he navigates every situation the sport places in front of him. This too is a form of statement. Perhaps the most powerful one available to him in that moment. Because the league had already acted. The umpires had already done their work. Sugano had already said what needed to be said. The accountability that the situation required was already in motion, already documented, already part of the official record that would follow the Colorado Rockies and the two suspended players through the remainder of the season. Ohtani's job, as he understood it, was not to add to that record. His job was to be ready for the next game. To show up with the same preparation, the same focus, the same standard of performance that 695% is built from, that 140 years of baseball history could not produce before him. It confirmed that the sport takes seriously what happens to its players when the competitive environment crosses from intensity into something that targets individuals deliberately and with coordination. It confirmed that the mechanisms of accountability that exist within professional baseball, the umpires, the league office, the formal disciplinary process, are capable of moving quickly when the situation demands it. And it confirmed something about the community that exists inside a professional baseball locker room. About what teammates owe each other. About what it means to watch someone you compete alongside be subjected to something wrong and find yourself unwilling to let that wrong pass without naming it clearly. Sugano named it. Without calculation, without managing his image, without the careful organizational language that the Rockies had chosen in their statement. He named it in the most direct terms available to him and let the word stand. If they don't apologize to Shohei, they'll never play again. The apology has not come. The suspensions are in place. The emergency meeting is part of the official record. And the baseball world is watching to see whether the accountability that the league imposed with such unusual speed will be matched by the human accountability that the situation still requires. In professional baseball, as in most things, the official record tells part of the story. The rest of it is told by whether people do the right thing when nobody is forcing them to.